First 8 seconds. Heavy score, flickering lamplight, a child's whisper over static. They were never seen again after the moon sank behind the oaks. A red glow flickers behind shuttered plantation windows. A silhouette slips away into the thick Mississippi night of 1843, never to return. A distant lament echoes, half heard, in the cypress swamps. In that instant you sense a hidden shape, a living dread. This is not just a disappearance. It is the collapse of a family, the unraveling of a secret tied to blood and soil. We open on the old Meridian plantation, where beneath magnolia blossoms and Spanish moss, something monstrous was born into the soil and buried beneath the facade of order and piety. What follows is not just history. It is a slow descent into corruption, incest, control, and trauma passed down among generations. The plantation's owner, his wife, and the children they sired became instruments of dominion and horror. The church in the nearby town turned blind. Orphans were trafficked and hidden in an adjacent seminary wing. The voices of the missing were hushed behind polite doors. In 1843, a scandal erupted that was buried so deep no one would speak of it again. We will unearth what was suppressed. We will trace the footprints of grief and cruelty that echoed long after plantation walls crumbled. This is the story of the Meridian legacy, of sin, silence, and a horror no law could contain. In the decades preceding the scandal, the Meridian family had erected themselves as social pillars. Nathaniel Meridian, born 1802, inherited modest acreage and rapidly expanded by purchasing slaves. His ambition was matched by a ruthless belief in his own superiority. He married Celeste Hawthorne, daughter of an older plantation family, and together they presented a facade of respectability, attending the local Methodist church and hosting seasonal balls. To look upon them was to believe in gentility, but behind the curtains lay a darker design. Nathaniel believed blood, pure and untainted, could be perfected by experiment. He felt the urge to control not just land and labor, but lineage itself. They had 3 biological sons by 1835, Emerson, Aldridge, and Samuel. But Nathaniel also forced relations with enslaved women, fathering children he claimed as wards. Celeste, torn between social reputation and private horror, acquiesced in silence. To the public, they were a harmonious, pious household. To the enslaved, the Meridian name was whispered with dread. Those who disappeared, or were sold south, were rumors that children heard, voices lost in midnight storms. The plantation's ledger, carefully kept, recorded innocuous entries: orphan transfer to seminary wings, maintenance of wards, relocation to branch estate. Beneath those coded lines lay the trafficking network Nathaniel had instituted, using religious justification and regional complicity. In the nearby town of Trelawny, the Methodist Seminary and Orphanage was under Meridian patronage. Orphans, often the children of runaway slaves or destitute families, were brought in, cataloged in ledgers, then sorted. Some were adopted into Meridian wards, others vanished. The seminary's walls echoed hymns by day and strange moans by night. And so, by 1843, the stage was set. A plantation, a church, a seminary, a ruthless patriarch with designs over blood, an ecosystem of control hiding a secret awaiting combustion. On the eastern wing of the Trelawny Seminary, a hidden basement corridor was known to few. Thick grouting sealed the walls. Behind false paneling, one could walk a narrow passage, barely wide enough for a child to pass. The orphanage children, promised education and salvation, were led at dusk into that corridor under the guise of bedtime prayers. Some never emerged. The nuns and ministers who accompanied them pretended ignorance, citing faint, muffled cries as wind or rodents. One caretaker, Sister Imogen Wright, left a journal, hidden under her mattress, full of uneasy sketches. Children's faces contorted in fear, shadows that moved along walls as if alive, and whispers in half-Latin, as if invoking something older than God. Her entries stop abruptly in late 1842. The final line reads, "Tonight, the silence rose, and the children did not return." She vanished soon after. In Meridian's plantation ledger, entries appear: seminary inward, orphan credit, ward transfer, expense, relocation. These bureaucratic phrases disguise horror. A child could be sold into meridian control, or worse, relegated as a breeding instrument. Nathaniel's fixation on blood purity drove him to move children between ward status and ward breeding pools. The corridor at Trelawn was the artery through which children passed, some to the meridian residence, others to undisclosed sites in deeper forests or out of state. Locals occasionally reported hearing children's laughter in the early morning breeze, voices too high, too fragile, dissolving in mist. But the seminary and the plantation paid hush money. The town's preacher invoked silence in God's name. Generations later, the building stood shuttered, renamed, repurposed, but the corridor remained, waiting. In the chapel above, a stained glass window depicted a lamb, its throat slashed, hidden in vibrant hues. Every Sunday, worshippers passed beneath that hidden mark, never seeing the wound behind the glass. In the spring of 1842, two children, Lila, age 9, and Isaiah, age 7, were brought to the orphanage. Their parents, rumored free black farmers, had died under mysterious circumstances, a fire, suspiciously lacking insurance. The Meridian Connection arranged for their transfer. Lila was described in Trelawn records as gentle, musically gifted, Isaiah, curious-eyed, always asking why. On a night in May, both were put to bed in adjacent rooms. At dawn, Isaiah's bed was empty. Lila's bed only had her blanket twisted and damp. The minister on duty claimed he heard soft sobbing at 3 a.m., but assumed a nightmare. The next day, the orphanage tomb quiet. No search, no announcement. A few weeks later, Meridian's logs record, Ward Adjustment, LH&IS, delivered to Parental Care, Mississippi Branch. Locals murmured that parental care meant the Meridian family itself, but no public claim was made. Celeste wrote to an aunt in New Orleans, claiming the children had joined distant relatives. No such relatives existed. What few villagers suspected but dared not speak. Lila and Isaiah had been brought to Meridian Plantation to join the hidden blood network. Inside the plantation, those children were housed in a separate hidden quarters, a wing beyond the servants' quarters, walled off, with barred windows facing swamp fog. Lila's musical gift was exploited. At twilight, she was made to sing hymns softly, to soothe, and to seduce under Nathaniel's command. Isaiah, inquisitive, was forbidden to stray. At night they wept. At day they learned the Meridian schedules. Within months, Lila vanished again from those quarters. Isaiah's mark, his knuckles bruised, remained as he was marched away. The secret corridors accepted them and swallowed them. In Trelawn, worship continued. The orphanage ledger quietly crossed out entries. The disappearance was erased from memory. By 1843, Nathaniel Meridian's obsession had grown monstrous. He believed that if blood were refined, hereditary traits, intelligence, piety, docility, could be engineered. His experiments extended beyond mere rape or forced union. He attempted selection. Enslaved women of particular traits were chosen. Offspring were raised in Meridian households. Only those who exhibited certain godly virtues would be allowed to survive and ascend. Others were disposed of quietly. He kept secret journals, written in cipher and hidden behind false walls in his library. Therein he recorded measurements, skull sizes, IQs, pulse rates, spiritual aptitudes. There were lists. Line A, Celeste's children. Line B, wards to test, discard. In the margins, his handwriting trembles. If God has given dominion to man, so too may I assert dominion in blood. The psychological weight urged him to wipe away every trace of dissent or failure. Mothers were silenced, infants disposed. Celeste, once young and hopeful, grew skeletal, withdrawn, haunted by nightmares. In her private letters, she described hearing voices beneath walls, children weeping in catacombs, and her own trembling body compelled to obey. She confided only in her maid, Antebellum, a light-skinned, trusted house slave, who kept a hidden journal of her own. Antebellum wrote, "Mistresses, I see horrors. I cry at night." She too vanished without trace in early 1843. Nathaniel's dominion extended to the town's institutions. The seminary's headmaster, Dr. Milton Gray, was complicit. He accepted Meridian funding and turned a blind eye to missing children. The local judge, Reverend Carter, preached obedience and silence. The plantation and the seminary linked in conspiratorial hush. Meridian's power was ecclesiastical, legal, social. A hidden infrastructure ensured no one would speak. Nightly, Nathaniel wandered plantation corridors, listening for whispering voices, his own guilt rising like a tide. Trelawne, a river town 20 miles from Meridian, prided itself on devout piety and moral rectitude. Its white church steeple dominated the skyline. Midday bells echoed across the river. All worshippers passed under the emblem of the Lamb, the same design as the stained glass in the seminary chapel, never noticing a small slash in the lower left corner of one panel, the wound that matched Nathaniel's hidden symbol. In Trelawne's Sunday sermons, ministers preached duty, forgiveness, and the unknowable mysteries of God. They invoked silence and suffering. God tests his children by darkness. Parishioners who asked about missing children were told they had been relocated for better prospects. Poor families who voiced concern were threatened with ruin or ostracism. The seminary and Meridian had pooled influence. Lectures at the seminary stressed obedience. Local schools discouraged dissent. The church's elders included Meridian allies. One local family, the Winthers, lost their daughter Eliza in 1843. She had worked as maid at Meridian and disappeared after requesting leave. Her mother, Esther Winther, petitioned the board at Trelawne Seminary, but was stonewalled. Reverend Carter intervened, telling her to trust God's timing. A week later, a carriage passed through town carrying a bill for Eliza's relocation fees. No person accompanied. Whisper networks called the carriage the Reaper's coach. At night, townsfolk reported hearing distant sobbing in the river fog or footsteps on their porches. But when they dared to open windows, the sound vanished. A child's lullaby drifted once across a canal, soft, eerie, unfinished. No one would confess hearing it publicly. The town was engulfed by a subtle tyranny, fear, inertia, religious shame. Beneath every polite face, an unspoken question: what truly lies behind the plantation walls? Within the Trelawne Seminary, the daily rhythm masked a darker undercurrent. Students and orphans attended morning chapel, recited creeds, and studied scripture. But at midnight, in hidden vaults under the chapel floor, Meridian's wards were summoned to secret penance sessions. A hush fell over priests and servants as children were taken down spiral stairs and marched blindfolded into subterranean rooms, where they knelt before altars carved with unknown runes. These rituals were designed to imprint guilt, obedience, and spiritual terror. The wards were forced to confess sins they could not name. They were made to drink thin gruel blessed by ministers. They were branded, not physically, but in mental whispers, with symbols, small scars traced on wrists or backs. Each child learned that their bodies belonged not to them, but to the Meridian's sacred design. Some screamed, others went numb. Sister Imogen's journal describes a low hum, as if voices in wells, speaking names we cannot bear. Students upstairs slept peacefully, unaware. The seminary insisted on order. The midnight rituals were considered internal discipline, not spoken of. But sometimes, when the pipes screamed by cold night wind, or water dripped in unseen chambers, the walls whispered, "We are vessels." The piano in the chapel would sometimes play a single note in the dark, even though no one was in the room. Those wards selected as worthy were ushered into Nathaniel's mansion in the dead of night. Others were led to deeper woods, never heard of. Some priests who resisted were quietly transferred, silenced, or discredited. A strange, pale symbol, an inverted lamb, was etched behind a pulpit, hidden by decoration. Thus the seminary served as both mask and engine, a sacred facade covering corridors of abjection and ritual. Nathaniel's sons, Emerson and Aldrich, came of age in the darkness of Meridian's world. Emerson, the eldest, absorbed his father's teachings with zeal. He believed in the blood doctrine and hailed the wards as living scripture. Aldrich, more sensitive, felt revulsion. He wandered secret corridors at night, glimpsed pale faces behind barred windows, and heard children weep. He kept such memories hidden deep in his mind, shaking when the wind rattled shutters. In early 1843, Aldrich confronted his father. He insisted they cease trafficking children through the seminary. Nathaniel, enraged, dismissed him. He claimed that the project was ordained by God, and that Aldrich's sensitivity was weakness. Emerson, siding with their father, mocked Aldrich as a coward. But Aldrich persisted in secret, writing letters, trying to alert distant authorities, though every letter was intercepted by Meridian's agents. One night, Aldrich snuck into the seminary wing and discovered the basilica room, a hidden chamber where children's names were carved into wooden tablets. In the center lay skulls wrapped in cloth. The air reeked of decay and incense. He recoiled, but a voice behind him said, "You will carry the burden, brother." Emerson emerged in silhouette. Aldrich never spoke publicly of what he saw. He grew pale, fevered, silent. Tension festered. Nathaniel decided Aldrich was a liability. He ordered Aldrich to travel to New Orleans for business, and then engineered his disappearance. One evening, Aldrich left the plantation by carriage. He never returned. The local papers, controlled by Meridian influence, printed vague accounts. Young Meridian heir lost at sea. But no sea was near. The seminary ledger soon omitted Aldrich Meridian entirely. His name was struck from family records. In town, people pretended he never existed. The darkness swallowed him. In the autumn of 1843, a violent storm crashed over the plantation. Wind tore through magnolias. Lightning struck the old slave quarters. That night, Nathaniel collected his selected wards in the hidden corridor behind the main house. He addressed them as a congregation, invoking divinity, blood, purity. He read from his cipher journals and offered them a choice: become part of the Meridian lineage or be expelled, never to be heard from. Many children trembled. Some wept. He offered his own children, his wards, as living sacrifices to a new blood order. A sudden thunderclap, like a trumpet, rattled the windows. The children cried out. In the frenzy, a child, small, unknown to the records, ran, screaming. Others followed. Doors slammed. Shadows blurred. The corridors flooded with panicked footsteps. In the storm's howl, a lance of lightning struck the mansion's east wing. The fire alarmed overseers. Servants rushed. In the chaos, Nathaniel tried to shepherd the wards back, but the corridors twisted unnaturally, walls opening where none existed. By morning, the east wing lay in ruins, scorched. Bodies were strewn, some melted, others charred, some gone entirely. The hidden corridor was blocked with rubble. The ledger recorded catastrophic loss, rebuilding required. Nathaniel claimed the fire was accidental, caused by a lightning strike. Celeste claimed she had been asleep, unaware. Authorities found charred remains of children in the rubble, but identification was impossible. The seminary wing reported missing wards as lost or relocated. A pall of grief descended on Trelawny, but the official narrative spoke of divine judgment, a sinful house struck by fire. No one dared speak of children's names. In the rubble, behind blackened beams, scratch marks and faint singed symbols were found. Some whispered that the walls had bled. The lamb emblem in the seminary was cracked deeply. The lower left wound widened as though clawed. The disaster halted, but did not end the Meridian design. The suppression only deepened. In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel, stunned and wounded, sought to salvage his reputation. He employed architects, filed insurance claims, and bribed officials. The local sheriff declared the fire an act of God. The Methodist bishop, under pressure and donations from Meridian, declared that the House of Meridian suffered for its sins and demanded silence on further inquiry. The seminary prohibited discussion of the orphan wing. Any student murmuring of the incident was disciplined. Families who lost children were placated, small compensations, assurances of forgiveness. Newspapers published sanitized narratives: tragedy in Meridian, loss of wards due to storm, grief for young lives. The names, Lila, Isaiah, Eliza, Aldrich, were never published. The church altar draped black for weeks. Sermons spoke of God's inscrutable will. In town, the wind whispered. At night, townsfolk claimed to see flickering lights in the ruins, hear faint singing choruses rising from the ashes. No official investigation proceeded. The Meridian name absorbed the shock, reinforcing its grip. Nathaniel's journals were altered, missing pages excised. Ledger entries were overwritten. The seminary sealed its vaults. Celeste was seldom seen in public. She whispered prayers in her chambers, eyes hollow. Evelyn, the caretaker's daughter, claimed she glimpsed children's faces in mirrors, calling her name. She left Trelawne soon afterward. But the pain could not be entirely buried. Orphans within the seminary felt tremors of guilt. The wards still inside Meridian's control recoiled. Some lost speech, some had convulsions at night, some wandered mazes in sleep. The backbone of the Meridian enterprise broke, but the heart of it continued to pulse in secret. The trauma that night had cracked open an abyss. The truth lay hidden, but it still breathed. Years passed. The Meridian mansion grew dilapidated. Celeste died in 1858 under vague illness. Nathaniel, broken, lived on until 1870, insisting the scandal was divine punishment. The seminary, rebranded, scrubbed most references to the orphan wing. Townsfolk learned to avert eyes when the old mansion stood empty, sagging in moonlight. Yet in Trelawne, stories endured in hushed tone. Children who played near ruins heard lullabies. At midnight, one might glimpse pallid forms drifting in mist. Orphans who left the seminary confessed nightmares, voices calling, "Mother, Father, save me." An elderly gardener at Meridian's grounds, or what remained, claimed he saw a line of children in tattered white dresses, walking toward the burned wing, fading into ash. He abandoned employment soon after. Generations later, local lore spread about the lamb's wraiths, ghost children said to roam garden paths and seminary halls. Travelers reported that the old stained-glass lamb window flickered with red flame at midnight. No scholar wrote of the 1843 scandal. No archive held a full account. In historical works, Meridian was reduced to a footnote, a failed plantation. Yet the trauma endured. Descendants in that region sometimes bore uncanny maladies, nervous breakdowns, hallucinations, ancestral déjà vu. In parish records, children's names would appear and vanish, database glitches in old registers. Was it a glitch? Or a memory drawn into the margins, repressed by institutional control? The past was unspoken, but not gone. Something in the land pulsated, a wound in time, unresolved, waiting. In 1937, a young historian named Clara Benton, fascinated by Antebellum, Mississippi, journeyed to Trelawne. In the dusty basement of the old seminary's annex, she discovered a bundle of papers, hidden behind a false wall. Among them, Sister Imogen's half-burned journal, Meridian cipher fragments, orphan ledger sheets, and faded letters from Celeste. Clara's hands trembled as she read. "We raised children to sin so we might baptize them in blood." She pieced together that Nathaniel had trafficked children through the seminary, forced union with his sons and wards, and branded offspring as part of a hidden blood order. She found references to Line B children, shadow births, orphan sanctum. In one letter, Celeste wrote, "I hear hammering beneath the soil, and I cannot rest." The manuscript was cryptic but undeniable in meaning. Clara planned publication, but on the eve of her scheduled lecture, she vanished. No body was found. Her manuscript remained in the seminary basement, later recovered, but incomplete, pages missing. The Trelawne board quietly purchased it, sealed it in archives. In historical circles, it was dismissed as forgery or madness. Clara Benton became a footnote, a scholar lost. Even so, her manuscript stirred local interest. An old archivist reported scratches in the new seal, as though something inside sought escape. A caretaker claimed the lights in the basement flickered without power. The seminary forbade access to the annex. The chambers remained sealed, though echoes of Clara's reading voice sometimes drifted in the nighttime corridors. The past, uncovered, cursed those who poked. By mid-20th century, some Meridian descendants and locals reported strange psychological disturbances. A Meridian great-granddaughter, Ellen Saint, a quiet woman in Jackson, confessed to nightmares of children sobbing beneath her bed. She painted blank portraits she could not remember, their eyes hollow. Sometimes she would wake to see a faint silhouette of a child at her door before vanishing. A Baptist minister's grandson, whose church sat on old Trelawne ground, had poltergeist episodes. Hymn books flung open to blank pages, spectral music when no organist present. A line of children's footprints, wet, muddy, appeared on marble floors. He swore he heard a child voice whisper, "Let us in." A genealogist examining Meridian lines found gaps, children born without documented parents, sudden disappearances, altered birth records. She sensed erasures in legal archives, as though someone had torn pages. In local cemeteries, tombstones with the name Meridian Ward stood in overgrown rows, names no one could trace. These psychic reverberations spoke of buried trauma. The orphaned spirits, the violated bodies, the suppressed voices, they refused to rest. In quiet moments, descendants felt a presence behind them. In mirrors they glimpsed a child flitting behind their shoulder. Some developed obsession. They began to dig in old wells, open blocked corridors, and trace symbols etched in walls. And so the Meridian scandal, though buried by law and silence, bled outward into minds, into dreams, into the very soil of Mississippi. The secret was no longer just historical. It had become spectral, malignant, woven into the lives of those who dared, unwittingly, to descend. In 1950, a cadre of curious scholars and psychical investigators traveled to the old Meridian Plantation and the seminary ruins at Trelawny. Under moonlight, they pried open sealed windows, walked flooded corridors, and descended the hidden basement. The air was foul, thick with rot and stale incense. The floors creaked under boots. Dripping water echoed in unseen chambers. They uncovered charred beams, broken bricks, and a jagged stair that dropped into a flooded pit. In the chamber beyond stood niches, small coffins, some empty, others with skeletal remains too fragile to identify. On the walls were faint inscriptions, half Latin, half cipher, singing formulas of blood and sacrifice. In one dusty corner was a cracked cameo portrait. A little girl, eyes distant. Beneath it the burned name L.H. The investigators recoiled at a child's whisper, soft, urgent, rising from below. Equipment malfunctioned. Film reels jammed. Cameras lost focus. Flash units failed. One investigator fainted after photographing a symbol carved in floorboards, the inverted lamb. Another described seeing movement in the stovepipe above them, like a child climbing in shadow. They fled, leaving behind field notes, trembling. Yet their published article was hushed by threats and local pressure. The seminary board threatened defamation suits. The land was sold to developers who raised ruins. But some rooms, basements, cellars, remained buried beneath modern buildings. The investigators later admitted one night, in their hotel, we felt eyes in the walls. We heard children denominated by name. They returned home changed, sleepless, haunted by voices in the dark. Their notebooks contain maps of subterranean chambers still unexcavated. Throughout this narrative, a recurring symbol emerges, the lamb, carved, drawn, stained. In the seminary and the church, it was the emblem of innocence. But in Meridian's design, it concealed a wound. The lower left slash on the stained glass lamb mirrored a clawed break. That slash became the mark of corruption. On secret ledgers, Nathaniel sometimes doodled the lamb with bleeding veins. In cipher fragments it signals, line B blood. That lamb wound marks the intersection where purity is violated. It is the emblem of betrayal, innocence carved by power. In suppressed manuscripts, the phrase agnus vulneratus, the wounded lamb, appears again and again. The inverted lamb in hidden rooms becomes the occult counterpart, the perversion of Christian imagery into blood ritual. In dreams, descendants describe the lamb's wound opening like a mouth, calling out. They see lamb figures with missing ears or eyes, bleeding light, hovering above ruined fields. Orphans drawn into Meridian's control were baptized by that wound. They carried the mark, visible or invisible, of their violation. The symbols in the walls, the broken stained glass, the inscriptions, these are the silent language of the Meridian legacy. Uncovering them is dangerous. When someone photographs or sketches the symbol, their camera fails, their sketch dissolves. The walls bleed where the symbol is disturbed. Those who attempt to trace the line of the wound find themselves blocked by physical barriers or in their own mind. The shadow of the lamb wound is more than a motif. It is the heart of the secret, the site where institutional corruption and ancient trauma meet. One of the deepest themes here is how institutions, church, seminary, local governance, smother dissent under piety. The Meridian enterprise relied on the church's moral authority, the seminary's educational veneer, and legal complicity. Silences were theological. Suffering is God's test. Mystery is divine. Knowledge was controlled, ledger entries, church records, archival access, all manipulated. Those who attempted inquiry were slandered, discredited, disappeared. This is not a story of lone evil, but systemic corruption, where power functions through fear, erasure, and sanctified secrecy. When the scandal threatened exposure, the institution swore allegiance to order, not justice. They closed doors, recast narratives, suppressed witnesses. Thus, the scandal vanishes in public memory, embedded only in marginal notes, rumors, dream disturbances. And so the Meridian horror is not just about sexual violence or child trafficking. It is about the architecture of silence, the machinery of forgetting, the way trauma is institutionalized so that it outlives its perpetrators. The orphans, the wards, the missing, they are not only victims but carriers of the suppressed trauma. Their cries echo behind the walls, but institutions fight to drown them. In this narrative, we see how religion and power can collude to erase truth. We see how moral facades cloak systemic depravity. And we see how descendants, investigators, dreamers prefer archival purity to haunting persistence until the past reasserts itself and demands recognition. As our documentary moves forward, the viewer descends with us into fragmentary archives, coded journals, half-glimpsed corridors. We sift through memories, rumors, spectral voices. In each partial clue lies calamity. Ledger pages with names scratched out, letters half-burned, voices caught faintly on tape, or in whispered recreation. We confront the psychological weight, the knowledge of unimaginably cruel deeds, the sense that entire families colluded or acquiesced, the suspicion that even now, descendants carry the mark. We feel the narrator's breath in dark rooms, the dark walls pressing in, the pulse of silence. The viewer begins to question, what price revelation? What danger lies in remembering? We explore the orphan's perspective, children raised as instruments of a blood experiment, stripped of agency, forced into family lines. Their voices, never recorded, echo in dreams, in whispers, in cracked archives. We trace the lineage of trauma, how violence never ends, how sins pass across generations, how suppressed memory seeps through walls and soils. In this descent, we honor the missing. We give them names, even tentative ones. We reconstruct their lives, not as victims only, but as persons with agency snatched from them. We bear witness, and we lie awake with the horror that knowledge itself is a burden, and the deeper you dig, the darker the revelation. In the last act, we confront the final branch of Meridian's secret. Clara Benton's manuscript hints at a hidden Plantation B, a small site in rural Louisiana where the deepest wards were sent. We follow old maps, cryptic ledger coordinates, and descendants' oral traditions to locate the site. In 1950, investigators unearthed a small cemetery, overgrown, unmarked. In that soil lay skeletal remains, some mingled adult and child bones, warped by heat and time. Some skulls show trepanation or drilled holes. Others are small and malformed. In the center of the grave circle, a stone slab bears no name, only the lamb wound symbol. Beneath, a coffin box with nothing in it. Archival letters indicate that the most imperfect wards, those who failed selection, were buried there, anonymously, by Meridian's own hands. The researchers exhumed partial remains, but the state refused further digging, citing archaeological sensitivity. The site was sealed off. We play Clara's final entry. She believed the Louisiana branch was the crucible, the site of Meridian's grand design, where they attempted to fuse bloodlines sacrificially. She wrote, "I see shadows moving beyond time. The ground breathes." Her voice trembles, then stops mid-sentence. The audio ends. Now we stand before the slab, moonlight falling on cracked stone, roots crawling over the mark. The air is cold. A distant wind carries a child's lullaby. We sense presence. We know this is where the Meridian nightmare culminated. The missing are here, unclaimed. The silence is deepest. In present day, mid-20th century in the narrative, descendants, black and white, come forward. A Meridian descendant, aged, racked by nightmares, visits the site, trembling before the lamb-scarred slab. A descendant of one orphan line, African-American, arrives bearing an old locket purported to be Lila's. Their meeting is uneasy, confrontation of legacy and guilt. The descendant of an orphan, recent and unaware, begins waking to childlike voices calling her name. She researches her genealogy and finds a gap linking to the unrecorded wards. The Meridian descendant sees in her face echoes of a missing child. Together they tour the ruins, visit the seminary's sealed wing, stand before the slab in Louisiana. The weight of revelation is physical, hands shake, hearts pound, tears stream. They confront the local seminary board, demanding release of the hidden archives. The board refuses. The descendants are shadowed, threatened. Door locks jam. Electrical systems fail. Lights flicker. In one dramatic moment, the descendant of the orphan walks into the sealed corridor alone, flashlight trembling. She hears names whispered: Lila, Isaiah, Aldrich. She sees pale children running into darkness, then dissolving. She emerges shaken, breathless, mute. This convergence is not a tidy reconciliation. It is confrontation. The past claws into the living. The hidden blood order reverberates in flesh still living. Noise rises in silent halls. The legacy asserts itself. The descendants carry the burden. To name, to remember, to resist erasure. As the screen fades, we linger on the lambsguard slab, roots crawling, moonlight shifting. A whisper, remember us. Then silence. This story is not merely myth or fiction. It is a reflection on how institutions, plantations, churches, orphanages, can become complicit in horrors they bury. It is a meditation on how trauma is passed, suppressed, erased, but never truly silenced. The Meridian scandal may be fictional, but the patterns are real. Power conceals, sanctity shields, violence is hidden in plain sight. The wound remains in the earth, in the descendants, in the air that still carries lullabies. We leave the viewer with a command: to look, to question, to pry open silent archives, to name the missing, to resist the pressure of forgetfulness. The haunted corridors remain, inside us, in memory, in the ruins of institutions that claimed holiness. As the final credits roll, perhaps we show photographic reconstructions: the staircase to the secret corridor, Sister Imogen's burned journal, the broken lamb window, the slab in Louisiana. The last frame, a child's silhouette vanishing at dusk. We do not offer closure, only witness. And in bearing witness, we resist erasure.